Yo, what's up, guys? Travis Peters here. We're going to be talking again today. We're going to continue our series on what does it mean to be a good steward, how to be a good steward of God's stuff, right? And on this channel, we mainly focus on how to increase financially, how to dominate your financial realm. So when we're going to talk about stewardship today, we're going to talk about it in the context of your money. And I'm super excited to talk about this topic. I feel like it's completely misunderstood in the body of Christ. See, when most people say you should be a better steward or I haven't been a good steward, really what they're referring to is I spent more money than I had and now I'm broke. And so what happens in our mind, the definition of a good steward, and we've also been taught this by other teachers, preachers, gurus, financial leaders, that being a good steward means you cut all your expenses, you spend as little money as possible, you want to go out to eat with your family, but you say no because you're so disciplined, and instead you take that $27 and you invest it in a IRA, and when you're 65 it'll be worth $4,000, and that's a good steward. Problem is, that definition right there is not in the Bible. What I just explained to you cannot be backed up in the Word. Not even in not even like in an implied context. So the word steward, it's actually not in the Bible as much as you think it would be, as much as like Christians talk about it. But if you go look it up in like a concordance, typically, and I pull it up here, I want to say it right. Typically, it is the original word in the original context. Epitropos is the original, I guess, Hebrew word, right? And it typically means it is a steward or manager of a household or a manager of land. That's what a steward means. Now, if you look it up in the dictionary, there's more to it in the sense of managing somebody's household affairs. There's definitions that talk about managing a person's affairs, a person's stuff, as though the owner would manage it, basically being like a little version of them. I'm a manager of their stuff. I'm a steward. I'm a caretaker was one of the definitions. I'm a caretaker. So in order for us to be good caretakers, to take care of somebody else's goods, stuff, possessions, money, land, whatever, we have to know and understand how our master operates in those areas, so that we can go and operate like him. You've heard me tell the story where I described the difference between two different bosses, and both were Christians, and both were very successful financially on paper. And the difference was one of my bosses, he thought the best choice was to get everything the cheapest you possibly can. So if you'd go and go shopping for 3 different items for the company, you pick the cheapest one. Well, if I ever there were times when he sent me out to go buy things, purchase things, opening new locations and a couple different stuff like that. He wanted me to get the cheapest thing, save as much money as possible, cut all the expenses. That was his way of doing things. So when I was working for him, I was the caretaker, I was the manager, the steward of this money, and he put me out there on a mission, and he had a couple things for me to do. Well, knowing my master at the time, quote unquote master, I was to buy the cheapest thing, save as much money as possible. So someone say, oh, Travis, you're being such a great steward. But here's the difference. Later on, I worked for another man who was also a Christian, and he believed in increase and abundance and overflow. He believed, like Isaiah 1:19, those who are willing and obedient will eat the best of the land. And he believed that as God's children, we should represent and honor God by living a life full of the best things. So for him, he was the exact opposite. It wasn't that you had to go buy the most expensive thing, but you had to buy the best thing, the highest quality thing. We sold new construction homes. So if he needed me to go purchase something for one of the houses or something like that, I was to go as a good manager and a good steward. I was to go and find the highest quality, best thing, because he believed that the clothes we wore, the houses that we had, cars we drive, it all represents God. It makes God look good or it makes God look bad. So he said, we are the type of people who have the best of the land. We're Christians. So when I would go be a steward for him, I would have to purchase the best thing. There were times when I got reprimanded for trying to get the cheap thing. And he reprimanded me and he yelled at me so much that it stuck with me and he got his point across. Okay, I won't do that again, sir. So how can you say that being a good steward means spending as little as possible? You can't. That doesn't line up. What you have to do in order to define being a good steward is know how your master handles things, so that I can go and I can handle it like he did. Because in my story, in my example, working for the quote-unquote wealthy boss who wants the most, or who wants the best things, if I was to go buy the cheapest stuff and spend as little as possible, I was actually being a bad steward. I was getting reprimanded when I did that. But it was vice versa when I worked for the other guy. If I went and got the most expensive or best or nicest thing, he'd be like, "That's not, why'd you get that? You don't need that thing. Just get what we need." So you have to know how your master operates in order for you to operate like him and be a good steward and manage his affairs, manage his stuff the way he would. That's how you get that reward where he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little. I'm going to make you responsible over much. Come on in." You just have to know how he operates. So in the parable of the talents, this is where a lot of people get their definition of stewardship, even though that word's not used in that set of scriptures. Perhaps there's an obscure translation somewhere, but all the main translations say servant. They don't actually use the word stewardship. Yet that's where most people, if I said, how do you know what set of scriptures would you go to if you're going to teach me about being a good steward? I think all you would say the parable of the talents. Yet again, if you go reread it, Matthew 25, it's not actually in there. But let's say it was, and let's say we're going to take it in context and be like, it does represent stewardship, because the whole story is about a master who gathered his servants and then entrusted them with different amounts of money so that he could go on a trip, and then they would manage that money, and then upon return, he's going to gather accounts. Hey, what'd you do with my stuff? And I think this is a great representation of how it all works. So God's entrusted us with stuff, each according to our own ability, and then he comes back and he's like, "What did you do with it?" I think that is a good representation of what stewardship is, right? These guys were entrusted, that's a part of it, to be caretakers of the man's stuff. All right? They were overseers of his stuff. Now, I want you to notice this. Go back and read it in one of the other stewardship videos. I dive deep into it. I read it to you. I point out all the things, but I'm going to give you the nutshell version here. He gives these people, these servants, chunks of money. The first one he gave 5 talents, and I had the numbers. I did the study. I'm going to butcher it here, but I believe it was about 129 grand. Was 5 talents in today's money. He gave the second one 2 talents, which I believe again was about 45 grand. Go watch the other video, and I'll have the exact numbers. And then he gave the other person 1 talent, which is about 29 grand in today's money. Okay, he gave them these things. The first one immediately went to the market. Notice those words. Immediately went to the market and began to trade it, earned a profit, and doubled the money. So he ends up bringing the master about $250,000, 245 grand, around there. Second guy, same thing. Immediately goes to the market, trades it, earns a profit, and doubles his money. Now, third person was afraid of losing what his master gave him, so he went and hid it. Most Christians are operating like the third guy. You've probably read the scripture and said, "God, make me a 5-talent guy. I want to be a 5-talent guy." But you thought being a 5-talent guy was being a good saver of money. But that's not what it says here. Those who increased what God gave him, what the master gave him, "I entrusted this to you. You went and increased it. Now I tell you, well done, good and faithful servant." Like, that's my boy. That's my girl. Look what you did. You doubled the money I gave you. You did something good with it. That's a good steward. That's what I'm talking about. You handled my stuff like I would handle my stuff. Love it. Let's go. And what's interesting is he said the same thing to the first guy and the second guy. Third guy called him wicked and lazy and worthless. Worthless. These are harsh words. You better take it seriously. Man, this dude's worthless. He didn't do anything with my stuff. How many of you guys aren't doing anything with God's stuff? And that could be money. That could be gifts, talents, passions. Man, God put something in you. You love writing, but you ain't written a book yet. You ain't written a blog post. You ain't written a Facebook post. What are you doing? Guess that man gave you this stuff. You ain't doing nothing with it. Come on. Now, this particular set of scriptures, don't get me wrong, a lot of people get confused. Well, they only get confused because they haven't actually read it. But it says talents, but talents doesn't mean like your ability to juggle or your ability to even write or anything like that. It's literally talking about money. A talent is a set of money. And again, like if you study it out in like the Dake Study Bible, it'll tells you what that exact amount is. Most likely it was talents of silver, which in today's money would be worth this. If it was talents of gold, it would be worth this. And so it's big chunks of money. What's cool is the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little. So he calls even like $250,000 a little. Because it kind of is, to be honest with you. It's not that much money, especially to God. It's money. All right, you've been faithful with it. You've increased what I've given you. That's how you be a good steward. Now, a couple things to note is those guys aren't born, God showed this to me, they're not born with the innate ability to go to a marketplace and trade money and make profit. You have to learn and acquire that skill, and that's a skill set anybody can learn and acquire. But you got to be bold. Remember the last guy says, out of fear of losing his master's money, he went and hid it. He was afraid to lose it. How many of you guys are afraid to lose your money and acting like you? You're not doing anything with it. You're afraid to lose it. You're afraid more won't come. You're afraid it's going to run out. Well, just remember what the master called that guy. And let's make some adjustments on the inside. You have to go learn and acquire skill. You have to do something bold. They went to the marketplace immediately and began to trade, began to go to work with it. They went to the marketplace immediately, quickly, boldly. There's some risk involved, right? Like they could have lost the master's money, potentially, but they had skill sets. They were bold. They went. They said, I'm going to increase this thing. I know what my master likes. I know how my master operates. I'm going to go make more of it. I'm going to go put it to work. We're going to increase this thing. And then when he comes back, I'm going to show him and give it to him. And also note, the person who had one talent, the master took it from him and gave it to the highest producer. The one who doubled the money and went to 10 talents. Give it to that guy. He's my top increaser. Give him that reward too. Study this stuff out for yourself. It'll open your eyes. It's a big deal. Now, I'm going to wrap up with this. From the very beginning, this is Genesis 1:28. From the very beginning, I believe like this is kind of part of our stewardship. The way I look at it is we are stewarding the kingdom principles, God's way of operating, God's way of doing things. And the focus of these videos, yes, is God's way of doing things in our money. But we are stewards of the kingdom economic principles. God's kingdom operates differently than the world's way operates. You guys have learned this by now. But listen to Genesis 1:28. I'm reading in the Amplified. Got it right. And God blessed them, granting them certain authority. You have certain authority on this earth, guys. And said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subjugate it. Put it under your power. Are you living that way? Rule over and dominate the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every living thing that moves upon the earth. He touches on this again in Psalms. If you go over here to Psalms 8, it says, what is man that you're mindful of him, God, and the son of the earthborn man that you care for him? Yet, you've made him just a little lower than God, and you have crowned him with glory and honor. Us, man. He has crowned us with glory and honor. And you made him to have dominion, to dominate over the work of your hands, God. You have put all things under his feet. That's a big deal. Are you living that way? As a steward, are you living that way? Most Christians seem to be defeated and down and this overly humble, like false humility thing. It's lowly on me. I talked to a guy the other day. And if you're watching this, I love you. I talked to a guy the other day, multimillionaire, young guy, maybe just a couple years older than me. and multimillionaire, has like 100 employees in this company. He's crushing the game, right? And I got him to open up, and he was afraid about building this new project because he was going to need to borrow a little bit of money, and he was debt free, and it wasn't a big deal. Like, it wasn't that much money compared to how much he has. He was just scared. And I said, hey, you know what, man? God's got your back. Everything you're doing is very godly. You put him first. You are led by the Spirit. If this project's on your heart and you have to borrow a little bit of money, go do it. The monthly payments are so low, it won't matter at all. And I'll tell you this, every step you take will elevate you. If your expenses increase, so will your cash flow. God's got you. You're led by the Spirit on this. And I thought he was going to be like all pumped up and encouraged. Wow, thanks for that word. That was encouraging, Trav. But instead he was like, maybe. He's like, you never know if the money's going to run out. He's like, this whole business is God's. It's in God's hands. If he wants it to thrive and flourish, he'll make it thrive and flourish. If he wants it to fail, he'll make it fail. And I just thought, gross. What? Where? No. Where? And he's a Christian, right? This guy's an outspoken Christian. And I'm like, where in the Bible does it say that? Why? And then I said this. I said to him, I was like, why would God want it to fail? You're doing a great work for him. You're super generous. You've employed over 100 people. You've given them jobs and you pay them well. I'm like, and then he does all this kinds of mission work with the prophets. I'm like, why on earth would God want this to fail? See, my friend I'm talking about doesn't understand this. And here's a problem with his way of thinking, is it's fragile. The way he's thinking, it's kind of that, well, business is going down. Looks like it's drying up. I guess this is God's will for my life. No, that's the enemy shutting down a good work. You're supposed to go to your word and say, Lord, you've said you've crowned me with glory and honor. You've made me to have dominion over the works of your hands. This is a work of your hands. You said you put all things under my feet. Romans 15 talks about, I can reign as a king on this earth. In the book of Job 22, it says, man, I decide, I decree, and I declare, and I get it. Whatever I choose to do will be successful. God backs my play. He's working in me and through me. He's led me to this point. He's not going to let me fail. He started a good work. It's not going to go unfinished, right? Like, that's the authority and dominion we are supposed to take as stewards over God's stuff. So my friend is stewarding over this business idea that God gave him. And for the last several years, it's been crushing it. But the way he's looking at it now makes me concerned, because if the enemy comes in and tries to shut this thing down, my friend might just lay down his armor and say, I guess it's God's will for this thing to fail. Sorry, 150 employees, going to have to just let you go. God, for whatever reason, God didn't want this to win. What? That's so backwards. And that's why so many Christians are getting their butts kicked. Like, if my friend doesn't change his standpoint, again, my concern is that his amazing thing he's building might go away and he might just let it happen. I once had a tenant in one of my rental properties, and bless his heart, he's a sweet older man, older black gentleman, and he had 12 kids, and they all lived at home. The house was big enough, or bigger than any house he's ever had, so he was very thrilled to move into this house. So it had extra bedrooms, has an extra game room and all this stuff, and extra bathrooms, and it's a pretty big house, one of these rentals I have. So he moves in there, and he loves God, he's a Christian, they do home Bible studies, all these different things, right? Well, first couple months, paid me on time, it was great. And unfortunately, this has been a similar situation to most of the Christian people I've rented my houses to. And I think it's part of the reason why most Christians aren't successful financially. Now, 7-8 months in, I'd come over to collect the rent, and he'd be short. I mean, sometimes by a lot, sometimes by like $500 short on the rent. Well, instead of owning up to it, he would say, again, he's a sweet older black gentleman, so he'd say, Brother Trav, that's all I got. You know, we're working to get you more. We're working to get you more. I honestly, I don't know why God didn't supply you with the full rent. Well, we just trust God. Here's what I have. You know, here's $700. I think rent was $1,200 at the time. Here's $700, and like I don't know why God didn't bless me with it, but we just trust that He's working out a plan as to why he His will wasn't for me to have the full rent, and we just know that He's going to prosper you too, brother Trav. Um, Man, thank you so much for your patience, and we'll keep working on it. We're going to keep trying to get you the rest of the rent, but for whatever reason, God didn't have it come in yet. And I'm looking at him like, you don't know God's nature. You don't know how this works. He was like 65 years old. I'm like, you've been living for God this long and you still haven't figured it out. Very fragile way of living. Very powerless way of living. It does not describe what I just read in Genesis 1:28 and in Psalms 8 either. It doesn't describe that person who has dominion, who has authority. Remember, God blessed us and gave us certain authority on this earth. That man doesn't walk in that. Yet he calls himself a Christian. And so months of this go by, and every now and then he'd have a full rent check for me. And I looked at him and look, so I just said this to him. I said, you keep saying it's not God's will for you to have this money. And I said, you have an army of children here. And almost all of them were of the working age. They were ages like 12 to 28, right? And most of them were above the age of 16. And none of them had day jobs. And I said, you have an army of children here. Why don't you just go send them out to work, into the workforce? I said, if each of them just made $200 a month, you guys would be living like kings. I was like, you guys would pay rent and it'd be so easy. And then you'd have plenty left over. I remember going over there at Christmas time. They had no decoration set up. And not even a tree. Not even presents for anybody. And he was like, Brother Trav, here's all I got. Again, I don't know why God hasn't blessed me with more. I don't know why God doesn't want you to have the full amount of rent. If He wanted you to have the full amount of rent, He would have given it to me and I'd give it straight to you. I'm not taking any of it. Look, we're not even decorating for Christmas. We're not even doing presents. We are just trying to get all the money we can to you. And I'm like, so obviously I got him like Christmas gifts, and anytime I had like clothes that I was going to donate to Goodwill or something, I donated it to them instead, and like I'm trying to bless them, get all that stuff. But they went a long. I let him go too long without them paying me rent. But he had this attitude, and with this attitude, I'm like, he's never going to be able to pay me rent because he's just a person who's like, whatever happens is God's will. Yet he's making Christianity look bad. Like, could you imagine if I was not a Christian myself and I was a landlord? I would be like, yo, Christians suck. Just being real. If this is how y'all think, I need to get non-Christians in here. Like I said, I've rented this house for many, many years. I bought it when I was 24. So I've rented this house to many people over many years. And my best tenants who paid on time were not Christians. Because they were like, hey, if I don't pay this on time, this dude's going to kick me out. So I'm going to go get an extra shift. I'm going to go work over here. I'm going to go sell something. I'm going to go do what I do to honor my word because I'm a man of integrity. That's the thing, man. It's like a lot of non-Christians operate in great godly characteristics. I don't want to be known as a person who doesn't live up to his word. So I'm going to make sure I pay on time. I'm going to make sure I pay early. Some people even pay me a little bit extra. But most of the Christians who live there, late, didn't seem as thankful, didn't seem like they thought I'm a man or woman of integrity. I told him I'd pay him rent on the 3rd of the month. I must stand up to that. I must hold true to that. God, I'm a man of my word. You're a man of your word. What do I do here? I need to pay him by the 3rd. We don't have the money. What's my instruction? Not a lot of Christians pray that way. Maybe you should. So I say all that to say, I ended up with that family after, like I said, I let it go too long, probably like a year. And I'm having to pay out of my own pocket for them to live there. I did it, like I said, I probably did it too long. One day we sat down with them. The wife was in the room and she was feeling bad about it. And she was like, do we need to move out? And I was like, yeah, we do. She's like, all right, we'll move out. And so I asked him one more time, I said, why didn't you ever just send your kids to work? And he said, because I want to protect them. I don't want them out in the world. I want to keep them as, they're Christians. They love God. I want to keep them protected from the world. And I let him know, I was like, you're probably doing more harm than good, man. Your kids, some of your kids are approaching 30 and they've never had a day job. They don't have skills. Like they don't have ethic, or they don't learn certain things you need to learn. And he was just like, I just think I'm supposed to keep them in the nest and keep them protected. But okay, go live somewhere else. I ran into probably 2 years later. Now maybe 1 year later. I was at a Walmart on the other side of town that I don't normally go to, and this little girl comes up. Little girl, she was probably 20, comes up and was like, "Mr. Peters, Mr. Peters." And I looked at her. I'm like, "Yes." And it was one of the workers who worked there at Walmart, and I didn't recognize her, but she was like, "I'm Mr. So and So's daughter. I used to live at your rental house." It's like, "Oh, hey, how are you? Good to see you. What's new? How is everybody doing?" And she said, "We're doing good. My dad took your advice, and we all got jobs now." And she said, "About half of us work here at Walmart. The other half got jobs other places." And I was like, "Praise God. That's awesome. Wow. You guys are out in the workforce. You're making money. Now rent can be eaten." I'm just thinking through all these things. I'm like, you could have done this 2 years ago, and you'd probably still be living in the house. I love those people. Those guys were awesome. They took care of stuff. They were great tenants, except for the paying part, right? They fixed stuff on their own and all those things. But if they would have just been better stewards, if they would have just walked in dominion, they'd be crushing it. But I'm only saying that to say is that's not being a good steward of God's money. By being fearful, let's go back to the parable of the talents. Those guys learned skill sets to go to the marketplace, trade that money, double it, make a profit, and the master can return and say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. Come on, I'm going to make you responsible over much." You can now graduate onto higher, bigger, more important things, stuff that really matters. So take that lesson from my tenants. Take the lesson from the stewards or the servants over there in the parable of the talents. Take a lesson from Genesis 1:28 and Psalms 8 that God gave you power, certain authority. You have certain authority to subdue, to dominate. Man, he made all of this under your feet. You're a boss. You're a king. You're a queen. You're a leader. Man, you need help with something? Go ask God for your instructions. Don't let things just happen to you. You dictate the circumstance and situation. You walk around as a ruler. You can dictate and change what's happening in your environment and in your world. You have the power to do that. Go to the Word. Read this for yourself. Get this in you. Listen to my podcasts. Listen to my YouTube videos over and over again. Get this in you. And if you haven't already, you need to go to the Increase Challenge. Go to theincreasechallenge.com. Go check it out. I currently have it for free. It's going to show you how to show up and dominate in the area of your money and your mindset and just faith in general. It's a powerful program. We've helped over 1,100 Christians at this point get set free from financial worry and start experiencing increase in their lives. Man, head over there today and make sure you like and subscribe to this channel. Please, I appreciate it. Hit the notification bell. It pushes the algorithm so that more Christians can see this type of lesson and this type of training. And it just helps get the word out. So I would appreciate it if you did that. That'd be awesome. I love you guys. Man, be a great steward. If you got to go learn a skill, go learn a skill. If you got to go practice something, practice something. If you got to go buy mentorship, buy mentorship. Get in these environments and these places where you can learn to be a good steward, an increaser of what God has given you. He's trusted things to you, but you got to go and use them. You got to go activate them. You got to put your hand to them. That's how you be a good steward. Love you guys. I'll see you in the next one.